Welcome to today's deep dive. And before we even get into the topic, I want to start by offering a sincere divine blessing for you listening right now. May God richly bless your day and the entire week ahead, bringing you clarity, strength, and peace in whatever you are facing right now.
That is a really beautiful way to begin, especially considering the incredible weight of the history we're about to step into today.
Yeah, it felt necessary. Our mission for this deep dive is to unpack a truly pivotal, action-packed ancient text, which is Genesis chapter 35. And we are pulling together the incredibly detailed historical and cultural notes from the Holman and NAA Study Bibles to help us navigate all of this.
Right, because without that context, you miss so much of what's actually happening under the surface.
Exactly. And let me just tease this for you. If you thought ancient texts were dry, this single chapter contains an unbelievable mix of high drama. I mean, we are talking about literal divine encounters, an ancient house cleaning of hidden idols, tragic deaths, a birth on the side of a dusty road, and a shocking political power play from within the family itself. It has absolutely everything.
It really does. It's a remarkably dense piece of literature. And from a structural standpoint, this chapter acts as a major transition point in the biblical narrative. We are essentially closing the era of the patriarch Isaac and solidifying the foundation of the 12 tribes of Israel. Everything pivots right here.
Okay, let's unpack this. We start with a call to return. God commands Jacob to go to Bethel, to live there, and to build an altar. Set the context for us on this location, because Bethel isn't just a random spot on a map for Jacob, is it?
No, not at all. Bethel is immensely significant. This is a massive full circle moment for him. The historical context tells us that Bethel is exactly where God first appeared to Jacob 20 years earlier.
When he was running away.
Right. Think about who Jacob was back then. He was a completely different person. He was a fugitive, fleeing for his life with basically nothing but the clothes on his back because his brother Esau wanted to murder him for stealing their father's blessing. Now, 2 decades later, he's being called back to that exact same spot, but this time as a wealthy patriarch with a massive family.
But before they can actually go to Bethel, Jacob orders what I can only describe as a massive household purification. He tells everyone to wash their clothes and to get rid of their foreign gods.
Right.
Now, to understand why they needed to be purified so intensely, we have to look at what just happened right before this chapter. Because they didn't just have a dusty journey.
No, they had just been involved in something horrific. Just prior to this, in Genesis 34, Jacob's sons Simeon and Levi had orchestrated a brutal massacre in the city of Shechem.
Right.
This was retaliation because the prince of Shechem had assaulted their sister Dinah. Jacob's sons had deceived the men of the city, slaughtered them, and then the rest of the brothers looted the entire town.
Which means they had just been literally elbow deep in a massacre. They are carrying massive amounts of trauma, violence, and literal blood on their hands.
Yes, and in the ancient Near East, coming into contact with corpses created a state of severe ritual impurity. They are completely contaminated. So when God says to go to Bethel, a place that literally translates to house of God, they can't just stroll in.
They have to physically wash their garments as an outward sign of an inward cleansing. They have to step away from the death they just caused.
Exactly. And part of that purification involved handing over their foreign gods. Jacob collects these items, and there's a fascinating detail here. He doesn't just collect little statues, he specifically collects their earrings, and he buries all of it under an oak tree at Shechem.
Wait, why earrings? Were they just getting rid of shiny things?
In our modern context, we just see jewelry. But cultural background from our sources explains that in the ancient Near East, these earrings were likely amulets. They were objects used for idolatrous practices, worn specifically for magical protection or to invoke pagan deities.
So they were holding on to these pagan, magical objects, while simultaneously claiming to follow Jacob's God. Where did they even get them?
It is highly probable that these amulets were part of the plunder they had just looted off the bodies in Shechem. They had absorbed the pagan practices of the people they had just destroyed. So Jacob burying these amulets under the oak tree isn't just a spring cleaning.
It's almost like ancient psychological surgery. By burying the amulets and the idols under that specific tree, they are literally burying the violent, wealthy, pagan conquerors they had become in Shechem. They are leaving all that baggage in the dirt so they can return to being vulnerable pilgrims dependent on God.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. It was a necessary, complete severance from their violent actions and polytheistic influences.
But that vulnerability leaves a huge question. You just mentioned they massacred a local city and looted it. How did Jacob's family manage to travel away from Shechem without being completely wiped out? The surrounding Canaanite tribes must have been mobilizing to slaughter them in revenge.
They absolutely would have been. A retaliatory strike was the standard operating procedure in the ancient world. But the text describes something called the terror of God falling upon the surrounding cities.
The terror of God. That sounds incredibly intense. What does that actually look like on the ground?
It's described as a divine dread, a supernatural, paralyzing panic that gripped the local inhabitants. Because of this active divine intervention, the surrounding warlords and cities simply froze. Nobody pursued Jacob's clan. God provided this invisible shield of terror over the region.
Protecting Jacob's deeply flawed family during this highly vulnerable journey to Bethel. Which brings us to the actual arrival at Bethel, or as the text references his time in Paddan Aram, this profound moment of an identity shift. God appears to Jacob again and officially changes his name. He says, "Your name is no longer Jacob. Your name is Israel."
It is a confirmation of a total transformation. Jacob carries the connotation of a deceiver, a trickster, the one who grasps the heel. Israel means something closer to he strives with God or God rules. The trickster is dead. The patriarch of a nation has arrived.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Pay attention to the specific name God uses to introduce himself in this moment. He says to Jacob, "I am El Shaddai." If you are reading a standard English translation, that usually shows up as God Almighty. But our sources dive into the ancient language here, and it turns out Almighty might not capture the full picture.
No, it doesn't quite capture the visual weight of it. The linguistic breakdown of El Shaddai is fascinating. The title appears 5 times in the book of Genesis. While God Almighty is the traditional translation, the exact Hebrew derivation is a bit mysterious. The scholarly consensus points out that it is most likely associated with the ancient Akkadian word shadu.
And Shadu translates to mountain.
Yeah.
So we were talking about the god of the mountain.
Exactly. It paints a vivid, imposing picture for the ancient mind. God is portraying himself as a prominent, towering, immovable deity.
Think about how a mountain feels when you stand at the very base of it. It's unmovable. It's permanent. It's so big it literally makes its own weather patterns. For a guy like Jacob, who's been running for his life for 20 years, constantly unstable, sleeping in fields, meeting a God who introduces himself as the mountain must have been exactly what he needed to hear.
That sense of permanence is key here because God uses this moment to reiterate massive generational promises. He is renewing the covenant made with Abraham and Isaac. God tells Jacob that a multitude of nations and kings will proceed from him and that he will inherit the land promised to his fathers.
So God drops this massive, universe-altering promise on him. How does a guy in the ancient world even respond to a moment like that? You can't just say thanks and walk away. Jacob sets up a stone pillar, which makes sense as a monument, but then he does something specific with it.
Yes, to mark the sacred spot, he sets up the stone pillar, but then he pours out a drink offering a libation, and he anoints the pillar with oil.
Let's pause there for a second. For a modern listener, pouring a drink on a rock doesn't sound very profound. What exactly is a libation in this context?
A libation is a liquid offering, usually pouring out valuable wine or highly purified olive oil directly onto the altar or stone. You have to remember, in a nomadic ancient culture, purified oil and wine were incredibly precious commodities. They were food, medicine, and wealth.
So pouring it out into the dirt on this rock was the ultimate sacrifice of wealth.
It was a way of setting that specific geographical location apart as holy, saying, this place is entirely dedicated to the God of the mountain.
It's a beautiful high point. But as we continue through Genesis 35, the narrative flow shifts so rapidly. We go from these towering spiritual highs right back down to the gritty, intense sorrows of earthly life. First, the text gives us a brief but incredibly tender detail: the death of a woman named Deborah.
Deborah was Rebekah's nurse. She had likely been with the family since Rebekah first left her homeland to marry Isaac decades ago.
She dies and is buried under a tree that they name Elon Baketh. And the translation of that just hits you in the chest. It means the oak of weeping. I find it so striking that in an ancient text completely focused on patriarchs, tribal destinies, and massive divine covenants, the narrative actually pauses to record the death of a family nurse.
It grounds the text in reality. The naming of the tree, the oak of weeping, shows that this family, despite their immense wealth and their divine backing, experienced profound, everyday human grief.
And unfortunately, that grief only compounds as they hit the road again. They are journeying toward Ephrath, which the text later identifies as Bethlehem. And while they are traveling, Rachel, Jacob's deeply beloved wife, the woman he worked 14 years to marry, goes into severe labor.
This is genuinely one of the most poignant moments in the entire book of Genesis. The labor is incredibly difficult. A midwife is trying to comfort her, but the situation turns fatal.
With her dying breath, Rachel names her newborn son Ben-Oni, which means son of my sorrow. You can feel the absolute anguish in that final breath. But immediately, Jacob steps in and renames the boy Benjamin.
The dueling names here carry so much weight. Rachel focuses on the tragic, ultimate cost of his birth, the loss of her own life. But Jacob names him Benjamin, which means son of the right hand or son of strength.
It's such a complex emotional collision. Jacob is losing the love of his life, but he is refusing to let this child be defined only by tragedy.
It encapsulates the dual nature of the human experience perfectly. You have profound, devastating grief over the loss of a beloved wife, occurring at the exact same moment as the establishment of the 12th and final tribe of Israel. Sorrow and strength right next to each other, permanently linked in this one child.
Jacob buries her right there on the way to Bethlehem, and he sets up a pillar over her grave to honor her. And our sources point out that the tradition of this tomb's location survives to this day. It left a permanent geographical mark on the region.
It did. But just as the family is reeling from this tragedy, you would expect them to pull together. You would expect a moment of unity. Instead, the chapter transitions into something incredibly dark.
It really does. They move on and camp at a place called Migdal Eder, which means the Tower of the Flock. And here, out of nowhere, we get a deeply disturbing twist in the story. Reuben, who is Jacob's firstborn son, sleeps with Bilhah. Now, just to clarify the family dynamics here, Bilhah is Jacob's concubine. And importantly, she is the mother of two of Reuben's own half-brothers, Dan and Naphtali.
What's fascinating here is the underlying motive, according to the scholarly analysis. Modern readers might look at this and just see a crime of passion or a massive moral failure of a son sleeping with his stepmother. But when you look at the cultural background of the ancient Near East, this was a highly calculated, repulsive political power play.
Walk us through that. How is sleeping with your father's concubine a political move? What exactly is a concubine in this ancient tribal system?
In this era, a concubine wasn't just a mistress. She was a recognized secondary wife whose children had inheritance rights. By laying with his father's concubine, Reuben was essentially claiming his father's property and status. He was attempting to publicly usurp Jacob's position.
So he was trying to force his way into the role of the undisputed leader of the family before Jacob was even dead?
Well, precisely. It was a direct, aggressive challenge to Jacob's authority over the entire tribe.
That is aggressively messed up, even for ancient standards. He is using this woman to stage a coup against his grieving father. And what is wild to me is Jacob's reaction, or really his lack of an immediate reaction. The text simply says that Israel heard of it. That's it. No explosive confrontation, no immediate banishment. He just hears it.
It is a chilling silence. But the historical analysis is quick to point out that Jacob's silence does not mean he ignored it, and it certainly doesn't mean he forgave it. He absorbed the information and he filed away this ultimate betrayal. The psychological weight of that silence must have hung over Reuben for years.
Because it does come back to haunt Reuben, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The sources reference later events, specifically Genesis 49, where Jacob is on his deathbed giving his final blessings. Because of this exact calculated act at Migdal Eder, Reuben is entirely stripped of his firstborn inheritance rights. Now, the firstborn right meant getting a double portion of the wealth and the leadership of the family. Reuben loses all of it. He loses the exact leadership position he tried so deviously to steal.
It's amazing how this ancient text does not shy away from the deeply flawed, broken nature of this family. Because right after this dark, dysfunctional power grab, the narrative officially lists out all 12 sons of Jacob, organized by their respective mothers, Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, and Zilpah.
It is a profound juxtaposition, the complete dozen. The foundation of the nation of Israel is now fully assembled, and the text lays it all out immediately following Reuben's treachery, as if to say, yes, these are the chosen patriarchs. This is the foundation of the nation, despite their deep, profound flaws and dysfunction. It doesn't sanitize their history.
That brings us to the final section of our deep dives, and it really feels like the closing of a massive era. We get this peaceful, concluding scene at Hebron, also known as Mamre. Jacob finally makes it back home to his father, Isaac.
The reunion is a quiet resolution to decades of distance and familial fracture, and it is here that the text records Isaac's passing. He dies at the incredibly old age of 180 years, old and full of days, as the ancient phrasing beautifully puts it.
And the image we are left with at the very end of the chapter is honestly moving. Esau and Jacob are the ones who bury him in the cave of Machpelah.
Think about the history standing at that grave. These are brothers who were once mortal enemies. Remember, Jacob had to flee to Bethel 20 years ago precisely because Esau was actively plotting to murder him over the stolen blessing.
But now, here they are, older, having lived entire lifetimes apart, standing side by side to honor their father. It's a powerful picture of restoration. The anger is burned out, and they are just two brothers burying their dad.
It is a perfect conclusion. The generation of Isaac is officially closed, and the era of the 12 tribes has definitively begun. The torch has been passed.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? We've covered an unbelievable amount of ground. We went from returning to the God of the mountain, literally burying ancient idols, losing a beloved wife in childbirth, surviving a horrific family betrayal, to finally burying a patriarch alongside a former enemy.
If we synthesize all the insights from the Holman and NAA sources, Genesis 5 serves as a microcosm of the entire human experience. It shows us, with unvarnished honesty, that profound divine promises and incredible spiritual highs exist right alongside intense human grief, deep family dysfunction, and devastating loss. The spiritual reality and the messy, broken reality of daily life are completely intertwined. Experiencing God's protection doesn't insulate you from experiencing heartbreak.
That is such a grounded way to look at it. The victories and the tragedies don't cancel each other out. They just exist together. And it leaves me with a final provocative thought I want to share with you, something to mull over as you go about your week.
I'd love to hear it.
In this chapter, we saw Jacob's set of stone pillars for two completely different reasons. He set one up at Bethel to mark a moment of massive spiritual revelation, divine blessing, and a new name. But just a few verses later, he set another pillar up on the dusty road to Bethlehem to mark the grave of Rachel, representing a moment of profound, heart-shattering sorrow. So my question for you is, when you look at the pillars or monuments you built in your own life, the moments of great success or the moments of great sorrow, how do they shape the identity you carry today, just as both those pillars turned Jacob into Israel?
That is a brilliant question to end on. Both the triumphs and the tragedies are foundational to who we become. We can't bury one and only keep the other.
Well, that is all we have time for today on this journey through Genesis 35. Thank you for joining us as we explore these ancient texts and discovered what they still reveal to us today. Goodbye, and God blesses all the listeners.